Hi spooky friends, welcome to Kelly Does Stuff. Today I'm going to show you how to create a Minnie Mouse Halloween house, and I made this piece for less than $40. This project was inspired by the comment that Tiffany Marie left on the video that I did on how to create a Halloween village for less than $30. And I thought that this would be a really fun and also challenging project. I've created accessories before. I've created small little ticket booths and cotton candy booth, but I've never created a full building before, and I've never tried to copy a piece. So when Tiffany mentioned a Disney piece, I turned to Department 56 because I know that they have a Disney Halloween line. And I selected this piece because I liked it, and I thought maybe it would be the easiest one to try for the very first time. When Department 56 released this piece, it was $160. which is definitely expensive. Now, of course, they do beautiful work. And if you are interested in owning the original piece, definitely shop around. I have seen retailers selling this for as low as $98. But today I want to show you how I did it for $40. And depending on the materials that you use, how much of the materials and what you already have, you might be able to do it for less, a little bit more. I think anywhere between $35 and $45, you could create your own Minnie Mouse Halloween house. So let's go ahead and get into it.
The base of our house is a 6.5-inch craft pumpkin. I got this at Michael's, originally $9.99, on sale for 40% off. Looking at the reference photo, I drew out the door and the windows on a piece of paper. I taped the paper to the pumpkin and then traced it so I could get the shape of the doors and the windows. Then I cut it out, making the first mistake of my project. Good thing I anticipated this and bought several craft pumpkins. As soon as I made that final cut of the door to separate it from the pumpkin, I knew immediately that was not what I wanted to do. I went back to my paper door, cut out just the windows, traced that shape into the pumpkin, and then cut out just the windows in the door. I did the same thing then for each of the windows, cutting out 2 panes per window, so that way when we light up our piece, the light will shine through. I wanted the door to have some dimension and not just be colored straight onto the pumpkin. So I used a sheet of black foam that I got at Michael's. It's 99 cents on sale for 30% off. Now, if you've been around here before, you know how much I hate measuring and planning. So I measured nothing and just did my best guesstimation. And that was vaguely right, but mostly wrong, so I cut that out again. I cut small strips of foam to create the grid thingies inside the windows. Did you know those things are called muntins and mullions? Words are weird. And since I don't measure, I had to go back in with my X-Acto knife to cut out more of the window to make it line up with the grid. Now here I kind of sort of did measure. I had drawn the shape of the door on the pumpkin. To get the size of the strips that I would need, I placed the black foam up against the shape of the door. I used the hot glue gun on the low setting to attach the strips of the door. I then placed the piece of paper with my door drawing on top of the black foam and pressed into the foam to give me the outline of this little bottom door detail. I scraped a blade along the black foam in order to create some wood grain detail to the door frame and window frames. Things were starting to get really exciting. It was time to make the witch's hat. I used a craft foam cone that I got at the dollar store. It was a little bit too tall, so I cut off the base, and then to make it a little bit wider, I rolled it in a few layers of aluminum foil. Now, if at any time during this process you find yourself saying, wouldn't it be easier if, yes, definitely. You don't even have to finish the sentence. I definitely think there are lots of ways this process could have been easier, smoother, more efficient. This was my first time and I was just trying things out. So definitely share some ideas with all of us in the comments. I utilized my very limited drawing skills to draw a bow and then cut it out, put it on some foam board, and traced it in order to give it a sturdier structure to wrap the aluminum foil around the bow. And I'm doing this just to bulk up the shape of the bow to be able to use less clay. And this is air dry clay that I got at Michael's, originally $12.99. Using my 30% off coupon, it was a little over $9. I used PVA glue to attach the center part of the bow. Then using a pencil, I created little dot impression. Next, it was time to cover the witch's hat with the clay. Using a pencil, I added some crease detail at the bend of the hat. I rolled out more clay pretty thin in order to create the base of the hat. The closest I could get to measuring was to place this on top of the pumpkin to see if it was wide enough. And then I shaped it to give that little bendy thingy in the front. Next, it was time to make the 2 little candy corns that lined the path. Now it was time for the cauldron. I am so excited about what I found to make the base of the cauldron. I scoured the dollar store looking for something and found these little ice molds. I thought the proportion was good, and then also it had those little feet at the bottom that looked like a cauldron. I could not believe I found this. I mean, it was pretty exciting. Then I rolled a whole bunch of clay into tiny little balls to create the little bubbles that were going to go inside the cauldron. It was time to paint the door, and I had my doubts. I'd used this foam one other time last year in a project, and the paint really didn't work so great with it. I decided I would start with a white base coat before I painted on the green of the door. I used this grass green color that I already had, and I didn't even realize when I was painting with it that it is actually a satin finish. Once the whole thing was dry, I was like, oh wow, that looks amazing. It's really shiny. Is that because of the foam? No, it was because of the paint. It was time to create Minnie's ears, and once again, I guessed at the size, had no idea at the proportions. I just eyeballed it. I used a pencil to create impressions in the clay that matched the reference photo. And now we're moving on to the broom. I created a general shape and then used a blade to create the little bristly things, and then I used a kitchen skewer to attach to the back of the broom for the handle. Next, it was time to paint the cauldron and the hat. I used a black metallic paint that I already had for this, and I was inspired to use metallic after seeing the look of the satin that we used for the green doors and windows. I liked how it had a shiny look to it. It helped it look slightly less crafty and a little bit more polished. So all of the paint going forward, I experimented seeing what it would look like with a satin color or a satin finish, a gloss, or a metallic. For the ears, I mixed together a pure pumpkin and an orange spice color to try to come up with something that closely matched the pumpkin. I did this in a matte finish as the base coat and then went over it with a metallic orange. And then I did the same thing for all of those little cauldron bubbles. For the door, I painted the metallic black directly onto the pumpkin, and I needed to do several coats of this. I used the same orange mixture color to paint the bow, and of course you could have painted directly into those little dots. I don't know if it was easier or harder for me to avoid them. It was probably harder. And then I used the metallic black to fill in the dots, and then I coated over that matte finish with that metallic orange. And that particular metallic orange was part of a set that I got for Christmas, but you can definitely buy all the metallics and satins at Michael's. I also added the metallic orange paint to the entire pumpkin so that it would shine like the rest of the piece. I had gloss for my yellow, so I used that to paint the broom. So far we've got satin, metallic, and gloss finishes. And the painting continues with the candy corn, gloss, yellow, metallic orange, and a metallic white that was a part of that Christmas set. Ooh, and what's happening now? We are creating those windowsills for our box flowers. And I broke into my scrap bin of my favorite XPS foam. You can get this foam at Home Depot. It's $6.97 for a 2-foot by 2-foot sheet. So if you don't have it at all, you're gonna have to spend $6.97. If you've already had the sheet, well, it's gonna cost you nothing because you just go into your little scraps. And it will surprise no one that the way I went about measuring this was just holding styrofoam up to the pumpkin, seeing what it looked like, and then making those adjustments. I glued the pieces together with the hot glue gun on the low setting so I didn't melt my foam. Next, it was time to make our mini sign to let everyone know who this house belonged to. I just used a pencil to create the grooves into the sign. That's what I love about this foam. It will take the impression of whatever you put onto it. Next, it was time to use clay to create the flowers that we were going to put into the flower boxes. And I just kind of guessed at how much clay I needed, molded it into the box, put it up to the house, and then I carved out clay there because since obviously the pumpkin is round, it wasn't going to fit completely flat, and I wanted to get this as close to the pumpkin as I could. I used a toothpick then to just create the shape of some bushes. Ooh, now we get to make a little clay pumpkin for the stoop. Just a round ball of clay, use the end of a pencil to create a little indentation to glue our stem, and I used PVA glue to glue the pieces of clay together, and then I just created the little pumpkin lines with the blade. I then wanted to make the flower boxes look like they were actually wooden boxes, so I used the blade to create grains of wood. I don't actually know if the real piece has this kind of wood grain detail, but I just thought it would make it look more interesting. I painted the entire mini sign a metallic white. Before we could move on, Angel wanted to have a photo shoot, and she reminded me that she had a special reminder for all of our spooky friends. Time to dig into those Amazon boxes for some cardboard. Now we're going to make the base. And here I just cut out a strip of cardboard, again guessing at the size, and then shaped it like you would a ribbon. And spoiler alert, you can get a pretty serious paper cut from cardboard. And there's that XPS foam I was talking about. I traced the base of the pumpkin to draw a circle and then cut it out using a box cutter. I then traced that shape onto more cardboard, used a glass bowl to decide how much bigger I wanted the actual piece of cardboard to be, and then I put that on top of the styrofoam. And if you look at the reference photo, it sits on this almost like porch type thingy, we're gonna call it. And then I glued the styrofoam onto the cardboard, and then I glued those cardboard strips to that circular piece of styrofoam. After placing the pumpkin on top of it, I realized that the base wasn't big enough. The proportions were kind of funny. So then I cut out an even bigger piece of cardboard and glued that on top of my base. Then I cut out little squares of styrofoam to glue to that base, just like the reference photo. Use the hot glue gun on the low setting. Now this particular foam is 1 inch thick, which is bigger than what I wanted. So you will have to use a very sharp blade, like a box cutter, to make your strips of styrofoam a little bit thinner. Then I placed that on top of a bigger piece of that XPS foam and drew out what would be the entire base of the piece. Then after that, I drew out the path coming from those steps and realized that the base was a little bit too big, so I made it smaller and then used a very sharp blade to cut away the excess styrofoam. Did someone say steps? I guess we better make those. Now here's where I did deviate from the original piece because that step just didn't work, so I made 2 instead of 1. If you were to measure and your proportions were better, you could definitely do this correctly and only have 1 step. Ooh, exciting things are happening now with a rock. I'm using this to create some texture to those little square bricks that I glued around the base. And now I cut super thin strips of styrofoam to glue around that edge of the base. And when the styrofoam is this thin, it does have some flexibility to it, so I could make it curve. And I painted it a dark gray color, and this is just actually a regular matte finish. I didn't do any sort of satin gloss or metallic finish for this. And if you look at the reference photo, every 3 or 4 brick, whatever those things are, were brown. So then I painted them brown. And now it's time to go and paint our bushes. And I painted it that same satin green as the windowsill. Ooh, and more painting is happening now. We are just painting all the things. I think I also did the pumpkin in just a basic matte finish. And the Minnie Mouse sign. Used a very thin paintbrush for this. I drew a cutout at the back of the pumpkin where I was going to put my light. The dollar store has so many great options for lights. I ended up using some fairy lights that I already have, but you could use any kind of light that you want in any color. And now we're cutting off the stem of the pumpkin. And I gotta be honest, I was really stressed out about this part because I was afraid that I was going to ruin the entire piece and then my witch hat wouldn't be able to rest securely on the top of the pumpkin. But you know what? It all worked out fine. And so many times during this project, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out. It's Disney. It's a replica piece. It's Department 56. I got to make it amazing. I got to make it great. And then I was like, Kelly, just relax. But I absolutely hate being told to relax, so that was not encouraging in any way possible. Okay, now we're back to the piece. I'm using a sponge to apply some PVA glue. And I know PVA glue is good for attaching two pieces of clay to each other, but I wasn't entirely sure how to do foam and clay, so I figured I'd just give it a shot, and it actually worked out. See, Kelly, you don't have to stress. Ooh, what am I doing now? I'm hot gluing the base to the base, and then I'm hot gluing the pumpkin to the base. And now it's time to hot glue the steps and the Minnie Mouse sign using that hot glue gun on the low setting, because hot glue, when it bubbles and boils, will melt through your styrofoam. I'm using a box cutter on clay to outline the shape of the little bows that we need to add to the window boxes. And I didn't even notice there were these bows until much later on. Otherwise, I would have made them at the same time I made my other clay pieces. It was time to create the grass. I ended up using my entire package of clay, so I headed to the dollar store and got this clay. However, I had never used it before, and I did a little bit of research, and it sounded like it cracked a lot when it dries. If you have any experience with this, let me know. I had invested so much time into this project and was loving the way it turned out. I just didn't want to risk it. So I went back to Michael's, got my clay, $12, used my 30% off coupon. Accidentally got the terracotta color, which was totally fine. This piece looked like it slopes down on a hill, so I used thicker pieces of clay up towards the base of the pumpkin and then thinned it out as I went down. Now, I am fairly new to working with clay, so I think I used way too much for this project. I think you could really make one package stretch the entire thing if you know what you're doing, which would then save you $9 on this project. And I definitely didn't use the entire second package of clay. I had a lot left over for future projects. I used a box cutter to carve out a little bit of the styrofoam in the path to also make that slope down. Then I added clay on top. For some reason, to me, the next part was a lot of fun. I used a toothpick to add texture to the clay to make it look like grass. Once the clay was dry, which took about a day or two, I painted it this Spanish olive color. Next, it was time to paint the path, and I used a whole bunch of colors for this, most of which I think were unnecessary. I just couldn't get the right color that I wanted for the path, and I think I just started off with the wrong ones. I think if you started first with like a brown or a milk chocolate, a sand color, and maybe a little bit of orange, you would get a color that closely resembled the path. Or you could just paint it any color that you wanted. Time to create some shutters, spooky friends. I just cut some really thin strips of that XPS foam, used my sophisticated form of measuring by holding it up to the pumpkin, and then I used a pencil to create the impressions for the shutters. I used a gloss purple to paint the shutters. And now we're adding the flowers to our flower boxes, and I just kind of did yellow little blobs. I didn't really think too much about the shape. Time to paint the bows metallic orange. And now I'm rolling out very thin pieces of clay so that I can create the purple band to go around the witch's hat. And I waited to do this because I wasn't sure if I was just going to paint purple directly onto the hat or use a clay piece, and ultimately I decided to go with the clay piece. I just thought it would give it more depth and dimension and look better. And I put that PVA glue directly onto the band to attach it to the witch's hat. We are getting close to the end. It was time to make the spider that hangs from the witch's hat. I cut a circle out of clay. To make the legs, I used this floral wire that I had gotten from the dollar store. I already had it, and even though it was green, I went ahead and used it. I just didn't feel like making another trip to the store for black wire. Turns out, though, you can actually paint this wire, so I painted them black. I'll be honest, this process was a little bit frustrating because the wire kept wanting to fall out of the clay. I tried to pinch the clay around the wire, and then I used the PVA glue, crossing my fingers and hoping that it would secure it in place. I put the glue, and then I just set the little spider down and walked away. I couldn't help myself and wanted to add some more depth to the grass, so I mixed some yellow in with that green and did a bit of a dry brushing over the clay just to give it a little bit of highlights. It's so subtle, but I think it's really nice. I used the same gloss purple that I used on the shutters to paint the band around the witch's hat, and I had to do several layers of this, letting it dry completely before going in with the next layer. It was time to begin assembling, hot gluing the pieces into place. As soon as I put that first shutter, that's when I was like, okay, this is actually starting to look like the inspiration piece. I hot glued the clay flowers to the flower boxes and then hot glued the entire piece to the pumpkin, holding it in place until I felt like the glue was completely dry, because only a little bit of the flower box actually was touching the pumpkin because of the curve. Time to paint the little spider gray. And this was how I learned that you could paint the wire, because I got gray paint on the legs and it didn't come off. So I painted all of the legs then gray, waited for that to dry, and then painted them black. I used PVA glue to attach the bow to the hat. Okay, now I had to figure out how to attach the spider to the witch hat. And had I been thinking far ahead when I was creating the spider, I would have attached the wire just like I did the legs, but I didn't think of that. So I tried to hot glue wire to the clay, and that definitely didn't work. Then I started making stuff up. I tore off a piece of paper towel and used PVA glue to attach it to the back of the spider. I just felt like that would give it maybe a rougher surface for the hot glue to attach to. Then I could put the wire into the hot glue, and that seemed to work. Once the glue was dry, I painted the paper towel gray, and then I painted the wire black. And then I attached it just by wrapping the wire around the hat. And if you have Department 56 pieces or Limax pieces, you know that there's often little accessories that aren't permanently affixed to the piece. You just go in and attach them when you're setting them up. So I figured that the spider would work just like that. I saved the ears for last because to me, this is what really made it look like the Minnie Mouse house. And I spent a long time debating the positioning of the ears. And you'll notice they're not exactly like the inspiration piece because I didn't cut off that little edge to make it rest better up against the hat. I was just afraid I was going to ruin the ears and I didn't want to mess with it. And here we are, spooky friends. We are finally done. Let's take a look. And let's complete the look by adding the lights. I had some orange fairy lights, so I went with that. You can use any color that you want. Thank you again to Tiffany Marie for this amazing idea. It was so much fun. It definitely challenged me. I learned a lot. I look forward to creating another piece like this, and let me know what you guys think I should do next. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you're gonna try this. Please consider subscribing and sharing this video with 5 or 10 spooky friends. I look forward to seeing you next time, and happy creating.